All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Road to 18-inch arms. It feels good to be back, and today I want to talk about some of my top advice for getting big arms. We're in an industry that has so much BS and so much bad information on growing because you just have such a variety of people in the industry. You have people that respond very well to training regardless of what they do. You have people that take a bunch of steroids and their training isn't even the biggest factor determining their rate of progress. And you have those people put up on a pedestal because they make the best progress, and then guys like me and you are kind of just left in the dust being told we don't train hard enough, and that's why we don't have the best results. So I put a lot of weight in my own experience, and that's why I put a lot of weight in the things that I talk about on this channel, and I know you guys do the same because I'm a natural lifter that has proven to be strong, dedicated, train hard, do all the things right on paper, and I still didn't make the best progress. And that's why me making this series and actually overcoming having small lagging arms through proper bodybuilding training is kind of a breakthrough for myself, and I hope it is for a lot of you guys too. It's nothing crazy complex or revolutionary, but it's proving that just the basics, quote unquote, isn't all you need to get bigger arms. Ultimately, I'd argue that from a physiological perspective, what I'm doing is the basics. This is what works for growth, but culturally, this is proven to be this kind of weird fringe training with all these crazy stretches and crazy lengths with slightly lower volume, and it goes against the grain, but it works so well, and it's being proven through the fact that I can even make this series and make progress this late into my training when supposedly I had bad arm genetics. So the first topic I want to touch on here, let's debunk a little bit of the fluff and pump. And I'm not going to get too crazy with science or whatnot in this video, but when it comes to the whole fluff and pump thing, you have a lot of guys that think arms are just this small little muscle group that will grow from higher reps in the burn and the pump. Maybe subconsciously they just want to get a good pump to feel good in the moment, but ultimately train your arms like any other muscle group. It's pretty logical. There's nothing special about the arms. There's nothing different. People like to treat isolation lifts like you can't make progress in reps or weight. And I'm not saying that just getting as strong as you possibly can is the ultimate method of getting big, but it is a happy medium between training hard enough to actually be able to see progress in your lifts and having good enough technique and just training hard and finding that happy medium between having the best technique you can. Part of technique is just choosing proper lifts in the first place, not even how well your technique is in your lifts of choice, but it's also how hard you can push and maintain that technique too. You don't want to go so strict with the technique to where you're limiting how hard you can push, because as soon as you push just hard enough, your technique is, according to your standards, not up to par. Maybe it's suboptimal or whatever, but at the same time, you don't want to just push so hard that your technique starts to fall down a little bit, and at that point ultimately you're not really training that hard directly, you're just having other muscles kind of take over. So arm training, ultimately it's not fluff and pump. Look how hard I train every lift, just watch my facial expressions, watch how long the reps take, especially towards the end of the set, and you'll see that this is not fluff and pump work. The goal is not to get a pump. I'm pushing this stuff as hard as I possibly can. I'm giving it my all, and that's how my arms have been growing. Another thing here, to kind of touch back on the whole steroid users and people that just are hyper responders to training in general, you'll see this in any other sport where the top pro athletes, whether it's NHL, NFL, NBA, whatever it is, the top guys that get drafted super high that end up being superstars, they're not necessarily there because they worked super hard and they just grinded it out and worked harder and smarter than everyone else. A lot of the time, these guys don't even train that hard or even train properly. It's just a genetic gift. And this isn't me trying to blackpill anybody. This is me saying that that's a reason why you should work harder and actually learn more about your training and work smart, because odds are you weren't gifted and I wasn't gifted. But in something like bodybuilding, where it's a very simple physical response, muscle growth, you don't have to be this freak athlete with freak talents to actually become a top level guy. So that's why you can see guys with subpar genetics make it far in natural bodybuilding, but you just won't get there training far away from failure or having subpar exercise selection. And this is why you see so many of the top guys that do get there from genetics. They'll say, just stick to the basics, maybe stay a couple reps away from failure, or arm work is fluff and pump work. And it might work for them because anything would work for them. Me and you most likely are not in that boat. I know for myself, I am certainly not in that boat. If I had great genetics, my arms probably would be 18 inches just from having a over 315-pound bench, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. So, proof that I am not a genetically gifted person, but also proof that, yes, if I'm not genetically gifted, if we can prove that, at least to the best I can, at least in my opinion, I don't have good genetics, then how am I still getting my arms this big? It's through proper training. It's through training harder and training smarter and more direct. Look at that rep right there. That is the difference. That is why my arms continue to grow. And if you can replicate that in things that work for you, your arms will do the same thing that my arms are doing, which is growing. Another thing here is you might want to move beyond just sticking to the basic lifts. And when I say basic, I'm talking about the culturally basic lifts, not the physiologically and physically basic lifts. The culture of arm training historically has been rope pushdowns and barbell curls, maybe alternating dumbbell curls. I'm not saying those are bad lifts, but those are very straightforward lifts that have similar resistance profiles and don't really take any of the muscles through a proper stretch or even really challenge them in that lengthened position. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can still get great value from these lifts. But if you're just sticking to these kind of cultural basics, to lifts that we didn't fully understand, we just knew they acted on moving the elbow and the forearm up and down to work the bicep or tricep, we have more knowledge and we have a better understanding of what actually drives growth these days. And that would be challenging the muscle either where it has really good leverage or in a lengthened position, or even just getting a really deep stretch in the muscle. So something like an incline curl, even where it isn't a lengthened bias lift necessarily from a resistance profile perspective, that's a lift that gets a full stretch on the muscle. Same with a Smith JM press. That's a lift you never see in the gym. And even if you do see people doing it, they never get deep. They never train their elbows to be able to handle heavy weight and a deep stretch. And they don't even push it that hard if you do see it. But I never see people do these lifts. Even with preacher curls, people always stop halfway down. They don't push them to failure. There's a million reasons why people might write off lifts like this. And it's kind of sad to see because I feel like there's so many hidden gains in these lifts. And I'm not saying just to stick to preacher curls and Smith JM press. That's just what works for me really well. But ultimately, the lift doesn't matter. It's the principle of the lift. So are you doing lifts that are stable? Look at this Smith JM press. Compare this to a tricep pushdown where, hey, buddy, sorry, Peter. My cat's completely just walking across my laptop. Please don't press any buttons. What was I saying? Okay, back to these lifts. If you compare this Smith JM press to a tricep pushdown, I'm pushing the bar with my back against the actual bench. So this is a very stable lift. It's not perfectly stable because my elbows still have room to flare out as needed. And I'd argue that's an okay amount of lack of stability. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be a preacher curl, which I'd argue is kind of the perfect lift if we're getting technical here. But a lift like this, the back allows me to put maximum force production into that bar. I can push it as hard as I possibly can and get my triceps firing as much as they possibly can. If you don't think that's going to grow you, you are crazy. Compare that to a tricep pushdown. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with pushdowns. I really like pushdowns and I still do them. But there's no opposing force to create that extra stability. Take an overhead extension like this. Even this isn't even the best lift that I could be doing. Eventually I'm going to have a better setup where I can have back support, but still, it's overall a lift. It gets me a really good stretch, but it's not the most stable lift. So I wouldn't bank on this for all of my tricep gains, and that's why you're seeing me kind of use it as my secondary lift for triceps. It's good for getting the stretch on the long head, and that's great. It gets a decent range of motion too, okay resistance profile, but overall, I have a bread and butter stable lift that I can commit to for my biceps and triceps, and that will just grow them like crazy. And this same concept applies to every muscle, and that's why I think a lot of people overlook this when it comes to arm training. They call it fluff and pump. They just say your arms will grow indirectly from getting strong on press and pulls, which is, I would say, BS for the vast majority of people. I've proven that myself, where I did get quite strong, especially for my body weight, and my arms were still very small. So with that being said, that's pretty much all I got for today. If you guys have any questions that you want to see answered in the next video, let me know, and I'll keep an eye out for them. You can expect next episode in about a week. I'll see you guys then.